Farming today doesn't always feel the same way it used to. Then again, some of it feels all the same. Maybe it isn't so much the jobs that changed, but how they get done. Now that's a different story. Efficiencies are critical, which is why you need a lender who will find the right loan structure for a strong financial future. You need a lender to look out for your whole farm operation. Ag Country.
Based out of our Grand Forks office and work mainly with about Hillsborough and North, and our Ag Country office is there. Been with Ag Country for 4 years, and prior to that was with a local bank doing some estate financial planning, things like that. So I've been doing this for quite a few, but happy to be here with Ag Country and be able to work with the agricultural world here. So I'm going to dive in. I may go through things a little quickly, but we're trying to get through a lot and to allow for some time for questions. So just give a quick overview of what we do. We focus on these areas. So we want to make sure your estate plan is in order. If you're passing the farm along to another successor, help you to pass that along successfully during your lifetime. If not, retirement planning. How do we get out of this operation tax efficiently? One of the hardest things to do is to do that tax efficiently. We will not do it tax-free. I'm sorry for that news today, but we can try to do so tax efficiently. Entity planning, sometimes within your operation or even throughout the transition, we may need to use an entity for various reasons. So how do we make sure you have the correct entity in place? We're thinking about things like FSA limits, making sure you have buy-sell agreements in place, and then also entity upkeep. So we have this entity. Well, now how do we make sure we take care of it on an annual or more frequent basis? Family meetings, the most interesting and fun part. You get to be part of family dynamics. Isn't that fun? It can be very rewarding, but it can be very challenging to talk families through various situations, and we get to be part of that. And then other planning, other things that are assigned, you just end up getting very weird questions, and you get to bounce ideas off of each other, help your clients figure out various questions that they have. This is what we're going to discuss today. Kind of talk about making the foundation of your house, right? This is the foundation of your plan. All of those things that I just talked about kind of work together. So we have estate planning, asset protection, transition and retirement planning, and entities. Those are the 4 things that we're going to cover today that kind of make the foundation of your plan and make it successful or not. So where do we start? First, we're going to ask a ton of questions about you because we need to understand your operation, because no 2 operations that I've worked with yet are the same. So we need to know family dynamics. Tell me about those. If you don't tell me, I'll probably find out later, and I probably would have answered things differently if you told me you had a crazy daughter-in-law or something of that nature. So I am the crazy daughter-in-law if my in-laws are watching. So bring that to the table. Your financials, we need to understand, what do we have as a debt load? What kind of cash flow will we have coming in? The last 3 years of tax returns. What have we been doing thus far so we can try to plan? What's your timeline for retirement or transition? Your existing estate plan, let's review your will or trust. What do you have in place? Does that align with the plan we're going to make, or do we need to make changes? And then life insurance, long-term care, and disability insurance policies. Do we have any of those in place? Those are going to play into our plan and our cash flow, as well as investment information. Where is our retirement income going to come from? And what's the taxability of it when we draw on it? There's going to be 2 things that really help enhance your plan. That being time. Give yourself time. 5 to 10 years ahead of trying to transition the farm, let's have that conversation and say, where are we headed? There might not be any action steps that take place right away, but let's get a roadmap together. That will give us the flexibility to change if we have time to do it. So if we have a bad year, okay, maybe we aren't making any adjustments this year. If we have a great year, maybe we can accelerate the plan. But if you give yourself more time, we can be flexible with that. And then the most important thing I'll say, I think Russ probably taught me this, so he'll say the same thing. It's good when your boss agrees with you. Communication is the glue that's going to keep your operation, your family together. We might not always like the communication that we hear. However, the importance of communication allows us to hear it, ask questions, try to understand it, and move forward. Lack of communication just allows us to make assumptions and make up our own ideas of what and why that happened. So communication is either going to be the glue that holds this plan together, or lack of communication, the dynamite that blows up the plan. Also, another important thing, I said there were two, but this, we need to remember throughout all of what we're doing, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. We can say something, but if it's not written down, my interpretation of it later might be different than what was actually said. So, for example, farming child, mom and dad say, this is all going to be yours someday. Well, then they die, and all of a sudden everything's split, because either they didn't have a plan or their plan wasn't, you get everything. And that is not what they intended or what he thought they intended, or she. And we need to understand that we want it in writing, and that's what we can go back to so we can all read the same thing. So make sure as you update your plan, you're also updating your wills, trusts, and other agreements as such. Same with buy-sell agreements, entities. So we put a partnership together for me and my brother and sister many years ago. That's a lie. They wouldn't want to work with me, but that's an example. And we never looked at it for the next 30 years. And all of a sudden, I want out. And we have to rely on that document that no longer is valid, wasn't our understanding all along, but they made me mad. So I'm going to say, well, we're going to go off of this. And that causes a lot of issues. So if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. Those are just two examples that we see too often. I'm going to jump into estate planning here. Maybe brush over this relatively quickly, but basically, an estate plan is your transition plan if you were not here to execute it. So those things need to be aligned. So we need to make sure. They also have a bunch of components. So I have 6 things listed here. So we have your will. How are your assets distributed when you pass? Is it a business transfer, or is it truly an asset distribution? Well, if we have an active family farm, we probably need it to be a business transfer. So your will needs to be structured as such. Do we use a revocable living trust? The benefit there is maybe a little more privacy, avoid probates in multiple states, so that might be a document that we're using as well. Durable power of attorney. Who will handle our financial affairs in the event that we are unable to communicate those for ourselves or do that for ourselves? We want someone we trust, right? So let us pick that and put it in our document. Have it written down. Same with healthcare directive. Who will make those healthcare decisions for us in the event we can't communicate them for ourselves? Do I want it to be crazy daughter-in-law? Probably not. So I want to write something else down, okay? And then once we get all those in place, we need to make sure the assets are titled properly. So as part of the plan, is it joint tenancy? Is it tenants in common? Do we have beneficiary designations? Is it in the name of the trust? So we need to make sure that's in place as well. Why do I need a will or a trust? Well, if you do not have a plan, the state has one for you. So depending on where you live, Minnesota has a plan, North Dakota has a plan as to how your assets will be distributed. Remember, I said if you have an active business, it probably doesn't work very well if you're not having a business transfer and we just go with what the state thinks is best. So we need to make sure we have our own plan or they can decide it for us. The need to have an updated estate plan. So one and done. I never have to talk to Bobby again. I did it. I'm done. Probably not the case because things change. Life changes, our asset base changes, a lot of things can change. So we need to make sure that we're reviewing it. If we're transitioning, I'd say every 3 years. If we're not transitioning, maybe every 5 to 7. Give you a little leeway there. But you need to take it out, review it. Does it still align with our wishes? Does it still align with the current estate rules? And capture what it is that we want to accomplish. Fair or equal? My favorite question. Equal. That means I have $4 million. My 4 kids, they each get $1 million. Doesn't matter what kind of asset it is. Does that make sense in a business transfer? Not usually, but maybe. It depends, but you want to make sure that you have a plan that is conducive to your goal. And usually, the goal is, I want to keep the farm going, but I want to treat my kids fairly. That other nice word that we get to hear. Okay, so what's fair to you? It's not what's fair to me, it's what's fair to you. How do we define that, and how do we write that down? I already kind of covered proper asset titling, making sure that things are in line with the way we intend. We may have something titled in just the spouse's name, and we didn't intend for it to be that way, or we have beneficiary designations that say split between all 4 of my kids, but it's an account that I just want non-farmers to have. Well, if I have beneficiary designations on it, it doesn't look towards my will, and it didn't do what I intended. And that can be a cause of some family strife there. Dive into estate taxes. So each year these are changing. Currently, the exemption on a federal level is each individual gets $12,060,000 of exemption, making a couple to have $24,120,000 in estate tax exemption. So basically, if your estate for a married couple is less than $24 million, you wouldn't be subject to estate tax, okay? Portability is available for spouses on the federal level. What that means is you can pass an unlimited amount of your estate to your spouse without using up your exemption. Then anything that your spouse did not use, you can port over and put on top of yours, so you get that $24 million to use at second passing, okay? That's portability. These are really high numbers. This is set to sunset to old law in the end of 2025. So 2026, we'd be back to 5 million indexed for inflation. Right now, we have basically double that. So we project that would be somewhere between 7 million, so then we'd have 14 million as a couple. With the increase in land values, it's not that hard to get there, right? We never feel like $24 million heirs, but when you get that valued, you could very well be. So how do we make sure we're not paying 40%, that's the tax above that exemption amount, when you die? Because do we have liquid cash to pay the tax? Probably not. It's probably all tied up in our business. Maybe we have life insurance to cover some of that, but we need to make sure we're planning with the current limits. States can have their own estate tax rules. North Dakota and South Dakota and Wisconsin are all coupled with federal law, but Minnesota does its own thing. So they have their own set of rules. So their limit is $3 million per person, okay? So that's how I feel, right? Sheesh. But so significantly lower, okay? Also, the portability that I talked about before, where you can use your spouse's unused exemption at your passing, at second passing, does not currently exist. So if you don't use that exemption at first passing, by use of a disclaimer trust or something where the spouse doesn't take ownership of the assets, you would lose that extra $3 million. So now if we let spouse's estate grow to $6 million, we would owe estate tax on the overage. There is an extra $2 million exemption that you can qualify for small business or farmland in Minnesota. If you are a Minnesota resident, you can qualify for that, bringing each of your totals to potentially $5 million, so $10 million as a couple. Still significantly lower, and there's a lot of things that need to be met for that, so you have to plan properly for that. Minnesota estate tax for non-residents, if you don't live there but you have real estate there, you still could owe Minnesota estate tax if your estate is over the values that they allow. So you want to be careful on that. There's a calculation. I won't go through that, but you need to plan for that as well. Gifting rules, we'll just touch on these. Sometimes gifting is used as part of a transition process. So each year you get kind of an annual freebie where you can give to anyone. $16,000 is that annual freebie this year. So I could walk around, give you each $16,000. You'd come back next year, but I'd be broke, so that's not going to work out. But I don't have to report it to the IRS, and it doesn't come off of my estate tax exemption. If instead I walk around and I give everyone $100,000, I'm going to use up some of my $12 million exemption that I just talked about and reduce that permanently. And so when I die, I would have less available at that time. So depending on what you're gifting, you could use that annual amount, but if you're going to gift an entire machinery line that's $2 million or so, you need to report that to an IRS, and that comes off your $12 million, leaving you with 10 at your death. And I'm just rounding numbers, so. I just talked about the machinery. Talk a little bit about estate planning with the land piece. How do we make sure that that land transfers to whomever we want or is available to the farmer to farm in the future? So there's a few options. You could leave the land equally to all of your kids. So we leave it equally. Everyone has an undivided interest in every parcel of land. Does that work? Maybe. It's the easiest for mom and dad to decide because really they didn't decide anything. But it isn't always the best option. It's putting farmers, non-farmers, your kids in business with each other. So they kind of have to agree. It might work for your family. Specific, so maybe parcels. We take specific parcels and we say, okay, Russ, you get section 12, Bobby, you get section 16, and we each get to manage our own parcel our own way. We can put rights of first refusal or options to purchase those parcels if we want, but we need to be careful with that planning piece too. But depending on how you want to leave your assets, that could be spelled out there. Maybe we need a trust. Maybe we need a trust for all our kids. Maybe we need a trust for some of our kids that we don't trust, right? The trust can sometimes allow for the farmer, if we want farmer to end up owning all of the land, to give him or her time to purchase the farmland from the trust. Or maybe we want to have some controls in place so any land in this trust is always rented to so-and-so. So you can put some controls in place there. Maybe we use an entity. One of the entities that is popular in North Dakota is a triple LP, limited liability, limited company, or limited partnership. So what ends up happening is once you have both passed, a married couple, usually your kids are limited partners or general partners. General partners kind of in charge, limited partners more of a silent partner, they share in the income. The partnership agreement is a set of rules that you have to follow to be an owner of this partnership that owns land. So those are used for various reasons as well. Talk about life estate. Russ will get into that a little bit more. That's oftentimes used in conjunction with a desire to protect assets, maybe from nursing home or something of that nature. But a life estate transfers the remainder ownership to kids or whomever while you keep the rights to the income for your lifetime. So we'll use that in a plan. Revocable living trust owned. I touched on that before. If we have a revocable living trust, sometimes we'll transfer the land to the revocable living trust to try to avoid probate and make the estate settlement process a little bit easier. There also needs to be a plan in your estate plan for machinery. If we have a successor, do we make that machinery available for purchase, and under what terms, if we still own it at our death? Or is it just given to the farming child? What are the terms there? It needs to be conducive of the business continuing if you do have a successor. Same with the farm site. Okay, we know we've built all our bins all around our house. What happens to that? That's headquarters for farming child who's been working. Maybe they put up some bins too. They've been working to make this really a great farm site. And now all of a sudden you die, and now they share in that with their non-farming siblings. Oh, we need a new roof on the Morton building or the shop. Do I want to pay for that? No, I don't even go there. But I own it, and it can again cause trouble. So we need maybe farming child to be able to access that or own it under what terms, a buyout or something of that nature. So now you get to be done listening to me. I'll pass the baton to Russ.
Thank you, Bobby. What's our time, Rob? 20 minutes? Okay. Question?
Any questions before
Okay.
he starts?
Yeah, I guess any questions from Bobby. I'm going to stand up so I can see this screen here. So I'm going to talk about asset protection today. The first thing when we get into an asset protection discussion is what are we protecting from? What's the challenge? in almost every case, it's going to be nursing home. So that's where we're going to focus. There's also other things that we protect from. It could be a child who's, disabled. It might be that we've got a pending divorce or something that we've got to protect for. But let's talk about the nursing home first. Just a quick background. The average stay is about 3 years. Right now we're seeing the average cost at about $9,400 a month. We do have cases now where we're seeing some of these cognitive issues where they're up to $14,000, $15,000 a month. When you go into a nursing home and you don't have adequate assets or income or insurance, then we've got to develop a strategy on how best to take care of that. When you apply for medical assistance, it makes a difference as to whether you're single or married. Okay? If you're married, there's more protected. Your personal residence and the homestead is protected. One car, a prepaid burial, up to $1,500 of cash value in your life insurance. And then other assets, they allow up to $137,400 of protected assets. So not much. That's maybe 40 acres of land, right? Depending on where you are, it could be less. So you apply for assistance, and now you have to disclose everything. There's an 8-page application form that you fill out. In one of those pages, you have to disclose all of the assets that you have. And if you exceed those figures that I just mentioned, you have to start spending down assets to those figures. So what does spend down mean? Sell, okay, or get rid of assets. So then we get into a discussion, how do I protect, especially my land? That's the big issue. People are okay giving up retirement accounts and maybe cash, but don't lose my land to the nursing home. And by the way, how do you lose your land to the nursing home? Do they send a guy out in a black Lincoln and make you sign? No. You just don't qualify for assistance, and you're forced to sell your land. So then we get into this discussion about how do I protect? Well, the understatement of the day is don't own it. That's the easiest way to protect assets if you don't have insurance or adequate nursing home insurance. So the first thing we'll talk about is, well, can I sell my land to my farming son or daughter on a contract for deed? And certainly you can, and it can be sold for any price. But remember, this 5-year look back, that deals with gifts. So if you make a gift and you go in and you apply for medical assistance, and that 5-year period has not been met, the value of that asset is still considered to be available, even though you don't own it anymore. That value gets brought back in, and you have to spend the equivalent of that value down before you qualify for assistance. So you can sell that land at whatever price you want on a contract for deed, but the 5-year look-back period will apply first, okay? Additionally, on a contract for deed, what the homes are starting to do is if you apply for assistance and you've got land subject to a contract for deed that you still owe money on it, they'll look at what you owe and consider that to be available. Okay, so you have to go to a bank or somewhere else, cash out the contract, and use that unpaid balance to cover care. The other option you can use is purchase long-term care insurance. The policies that we saw purchased 10 to 15 years ago were way better than what you see today. The policies that are coming out today just don't cut it. And I don't know this for a fact, but we kind of think that the insurance companies did not estimate the high value, the large claims that they're seeing, the expenses that are occurring at each home. So they really had to water down the policies. The one thing I'll tell you with nursing home insurance, if you buy it, look at it when you're early to mid-50s, and always get an inflation rider. If you don't get an inflation rider, we're of the opinion you probably shouldn't buy it because it won't keep up. It just won't keep up with expenses. In North Dakota and now in Minnesota, we can use an irrevocable trust. There are 2 types of trust. What Bobby was talking about is a revocable trust. You can change that. A revocable trust does not protect. An irrevocable trust does. There was a recent court case in Carver County, Minnesota that settled last year. The opinion was written by the judge in June that brought irrevocable trusts back into Minnesota as a protection tool. So it's a type of trust you can't change. After 5 years, land in an irrevocable trust is protected, and during the life of the trust, you get all the rental income. I must be hitting the button, huh? Bobby talked a little bit about life estates. A life estate is when land is deeded out of your name and into your children's name. However, the parents retain the rights to the income. This is the most common strategy that we use. Doesn't work as well in Minnesota. Don't have time today to get into all those nuances, but we still use them in both states. After 5 years, land with the life estate is a protected asset. So we've got to be a little careful in Minnesota. There's some detail down there. And by the way, I forgot to mention at the beginning, we do have this handout back there. If you want to grab a copy before you leave today, you certainly can. So let's talk about transition and retirement planning. When do farmers really, truly retire?
When they die.
At the funeral, yeah. That's true
That's
retirement.
the correct answer.
So, yeah. So where do we start? Bobby talked a little bit about this. Is everybody on the same page? And it's funny when we get into a meeting and I ask the parents their goals, and we usually have the meeting first with the parents in a transition plan, and she says this and he says that, and they're not even close. Okay, we know you haven't talked, we know you haven't visited, or you're just stubborn and you're going to stay the way you want to be. So we need to make sure everybody's on the same page. We also do a blood test. Now, ag country doesn't have needles. It's a blood test about is farming in your blood. Is this something that you really want to do? You know, you think about the last couple of years, you know, the late teens, that was a tough stretch for farming and ranching. If you don't really like doing this, it's going to be hard to last. We need to make sure the management skills are there, the work ethic. We need to make sure that that successor has an owner's mentality, not an employee's mentality. Okay? We need to make sure that mom and dad are mentors, not meddlers. Okay? We want them leading and showing those young producers. So we need to know a lot about you when we get started. And then we have to devise a plan for how do the younger generation, how do the successors work up? Are we going to gift assets? Are we going to sell assets? Do we start moving acres from the senior farmers to the junior farmers so that the junior farmer can start building their land base, maybe getting involved in machinery purchases? How do we get the parents to move down? Transition is there's two parts to transition. There's assets and management. Assets are easy to transfer. What about management? Okay? We just had the queen die, 96 years old. Now her 73-year-old son gets to transition in. Is that a good plan? So we want to make sure we've got something where we're talking about a reasonable transition. I'll have you look at this screen. You can see here, we're having a little fun with you. Bobby talked about communication. It is truly the glue that makes it work or the dynamite that blows it apart. If we don't have good communication, expectations aren't talked about. And uncommunicated expectations are probably the biggest reason people fight. I'm expecting something from you, you're expecting something from me, and we haven't told each other about it, so the expectations don't get met. And I get frustrated, and I might get mad, and we start fighting. So we want to make sure that you're talking and you're all on the same page. We like to, sometimes we'll recommend that you have a meeting every month. Just sit down, make it a business meeting, talk about things, have a fixed agenda so everything gets talked about. So why not just sell assets, okay? Especially when I'm going to retire, why don't I just sell my farm to my successor like my dad maybe did to me? Well, right now with high land values, high machinery values, first off, it's probably not feasible, but the tax bill is going to kill you. So we have to get much more creative with respect to what we're doing to move these farms. Grain bins, machinery, those are generally the first to go, especially machinery, and the reason for machinery is it's transactional. You're probably replacing pieces every year, maybe every other year, the big stuff, and so there we want to get that junior farmer involved. There's a lot of ways to do this. We can gift a piece to them, they can trade it off, we can set up some leases. It's a matter of the financial stability of the farm. If we're moving acres to that successor, they're starting to take over their parents' acres, then maybe they should be taking on more of the machinery expense over time. All right, you need income from machinery. We could sell the machinery, or we could lease it. One thing I want to talk about, you see that word installment sale. Okay, that's a nasty little tax trap that deals with a tax that is assessed on depreciated assets when they're sold on a contract over time. So let's say you're going to sell your machinery to your successor over a 10-year time frame. You get, say, $50,000 a year on a $500,000 contract. The installment sale tax rules require that all of the taxes be paid in the first year. So you get taxed on $500,000 of income, but you only get one payment. So the way we get around that is we set up what's called an operating lease or a machinery lease. And a lease is sort of like a rent-to-own. Again, we don't have time today to get into all of that, but it really works well because only the payments are taxed. Okay? By the way, the leases that we help design allow for trades and upgrades during the life. So you have to make sure that that farm can continue to function. One of the things that's becoming, to me, surprisingly popular is for the parents to gift all or some of the machinery to their successor and then bump up the cash rents. This one's old as the hills, but it's really starting to be used a lot more. And I think the reason for that is simply because of the high value that this machinery has. Okay? We've done combinations of gifting and leasing, but it works well because it's incredibly efficient. We don't have a sale of the machinery, which generates tax. And then land rent is a very efficient form of income because land rent is just subject to income tax and not self-employment tax. So there's a lot of advantages to this plan. But if there's other kids, we have to have a conversation about what do we do with those non-farming kids. And then we have that conversation also about fair versus equal. So you've got to have all this in place before we really get to this. How about land? Usually it's the last asset to transfer, if at all. This is a parent's source of retirement income. It's also their sense and source of security. If we sell land during our life and we've got land that we purchased 20, 30 years ago, we might have a cost basis in it of $500 an acre. If it's sold for $4,000 an acre, we've got a $3,500 per acre tax. Most of the farmers I know hate taxes, so we want to get around paying tax. And what we're seeing also is the appreciation in land values has, for the most part, over the last 10 years, really created some issues, some issues within the family. I mentioned transitioning land and how to do that. The easiest is just to move the farmed acres, not the owned acres, but just start moving acres to that successor. And they can just start taking over in that way. It's really pretty easy. Then maybe later on, we want to keep that successor's balance sheet strong, especially if you're renting a lot of land. You know, if you're renting 70% of your land, there's a very high probability you're going to be buying some of that. And who should we have buying that land? The 60-year-old dad or the 38-year-old son? You know, do you want to take on a lot of debt when you're in your 60s? So it's real important that we have a plan for the land. Retirement planning, again, I mentioned tongue-in-cheek, that farmers really don't retire. We call it retirement planning, but really it's a shift in your role. Unless you don't have a successor, then it's probably going to be more retirement planning. We need to know where that money is going to come from. You know, this is a list of what we see 90% of the time. And there you can see I've got next to machinery, grain handling, and building, watch those installment sale rules. We see too many people selling farm sites on a contract for deed. They go to have their taxes done next year, and the tax person says, you got to pay tax on all those buildings this year. So then we talk, you know, if you got to us, we would probably put you in a lease for that building site, sell the land on a contract for deed, and then lease the buildings. Social Security and Medicare, this bothers producers. I think a lot of people don't really trust Social Security. But the tax on this is that there's 15.3% on the first $147,000 of income, and after that you just pay the Medicare tax. You're eligible to take Social Security at 62. If you take it, there's about a 30% discount. as if you were to wait till you're fully retired, which for many people is between 66 and 67 years of age. And if you wait to take Social Security until you're 70, it goes up 8% a year between 67 and 66 and 70. Minutes? Okay. So let's finish up with entities. Why an entity? There's all kinds of reasons. The thing that we'll tell you is that if it doesn't make your situation better, why would you want to have another checkbook and another tax return? The entity has to make something better. There's all kinds of reasons you can see on this slide that we set entities up, but it's got to improve the operation or make it efficient or do something for us. It's cool to say I farm through a corporation or an LLC, but if it doesn't do anything for you, why do it? When you have an entity, we want you, if it's just you that owns it or your spouse and you, that's fine. But if you've got anybody other than those two owning it, we want to talk to you about a buy-sell agreement. The buy-sell agreement is a document that talks about what happens if the entity is dissolved, if there's a death, there's a departure, there's a disability, or a divorce. What have we agreed to do? You don't want to make a decision about those 5 Ds during the event. The most devastating is disability. Okay, it's hard to plan. If you're farming with a relative and all of a sudden they're disabled and they're getting income out of this entity, but they can't contribute anymore, how long are you going to continue to pay them? How long do they get profits from that entity? So that can be a tough one, and we want to make sure we've got an agreement in place first. I talked about the buy-sell agreement. Really, the buy-sell is embedded in the body of the whatever document we're dealing with. Partnership agreement, shareholder purchase agreement if it's a corporation, member control agreement if it's an LLC. What happens if something happens and it says who can own, how that entity is valued, and what are the terms for the buyout. And Bobby talked about the value of these farms. The terms for the buyout is really what we got to look at. I had a farm I worked with over in Minnesota. It's on the side. That's why it keeps doing that. There's a clicker on the side. That farm had land, beet stock, and machinery in its corporation that was formed in 1981. Okay? The corporation was worth $13.1 million. And the buy-sell said that they had to buy out in a 5-year time frame. 3 owners. Would have never worked. So we've got to look at the time frame on these buyouts. That's usually where we're going to tune up these buy-sell agreements. Last family meetings, why? Gets everybody on the same page. Okay? I like family meetings. We'll be the first to tell you not every farm can have one. Some of the family dynamics we work with out there, we don't want a family meeting. It just isn't going to work. But most of the time, it gets everybody on the same page. The parents are there to answer questions, like Bobby mentioned. It eliminates the surprise factor. Sometimes we're there to facilitate. If things are a little more complicated, the 3 of us might be sitting in that room with the family. So what makes a good plan great? Time. It's not for us. That's for you. We've unwound entities in a very short period of time. I've been called by farmers who are getting out of the combine the end of October and said, I'm done. We can do it, but time is for you. And so is communication. So make sure you're talking, be intentional about your communication, make sure you've got a platform for it to happen. So
I think we have a few minutes for questions, if anyone has any.
You talk about making sure your estate plan is updated. How often? Are you talking 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? What is best?
Very good question, Ed. Depends if you've got a successor, you should be looking at it every 3 years, every 3 to 5. If there isn't a successor, 5 to 8, unless something changes. If there's a marital status change, a death, an inheritance, tax law changes, then we get you in right away. But 3 to 5 if you've got a successor, 5 to 8 if there isn't a successor.
Other questions?
Okay. Well, yeah, go ahead.
More. So the question was, what question should I ask? I will tell you one that I get asked often, and I'll ask Russ, I'll make him answer. How do I stay on track? So transition planning is very challenging. And it's not like I have a template and I'm like, here you go, this is what you're supposed to do. This will work for you. How do you stay on track with your plan once you've kind of devised an outline of the plan?
You have meetings. Farmers hate meetings. Taxes and meetings. I don't have time for that, I'm busy. But when you've got, especially a successor coming in, you want to make sure you've got some kind of formalized process to keep you on track. That might be meeting with us every year. It might be a monthly meeting with yourself. So what question should you ask? You should ask yourself what you want. What are my expectations of this farm? I've been here my whole life. Here's what I want. It's going to be different if you've got a successor than if you don't have a successor. If you don't have a successor, what you want is to keep as much of that farm as you can for your retirement. Okay, so that means if you have an auction sale for your machinery, you want to have a tax plan in place because that's an awful lot of income that all of a sudden hits that 1040. It messes up your Medicare premium. It just pushes you into these higher brackets. So what you want to do is know your goals. If you've got a successor, you want to ask your son or daughter what their expectations are. That, I think, is the smartest thing that a senior farmer can do is get their son or daughter sitting at the table and say, what are your expectations? Because you may not know. Or you may have an assumption in your head that, oh, yeah, they're just going to want to take over. And they may look at you and go, no, I'd like to have a seed business too. And so now it's a little different positioning of how that succession plan might take over. But make sure you're clear on your goals, and if you've got a successor, be very certain that you know what their expectations are. Yeah, the question was, when you put this together, do you work with an attorney? Absolutely. We didn't have time to put the full deal presentation here, but we're team players. I mean, we kind of view ourselves as the quarterback because it's going to take an accountant, good tax people, it's going to take an attorney. We need to know about your crop insurance, your loan officer, your investment people. Our job is to coordinate all of those individuals. I'll say one thing and I'll let Bobby kind of finish up. We're a little picky when it comes to lawyers. And the reason for that is agriculture is a specialized arena. I talked to an attorney in Minnesota 7-8 years ago. Smart gal, very friendly, no kidding. Asked the question through the phone, so what's an acre? And I had to tell her, here's what an acre is. And just an innocent question. She's representing one of our customers in northern Minnesota. And I thought to myself, I don't know if this is going to go well. So, yeah. Go ahead, Bobby, if you got
No, that's good.
Okay.
That's all the time that we have, but thank you guys for stopping by and enjoy the rest of the day at Big Iron.
Thank you.